10 years ago when really Cortland got its own mailing address and zip code.
Yeah.
Really, the address that you sent, even if you lived in the town of Cortland, was Peekskill, New York. So I think that's
true. Well,
that's
it's still
really
true to some extent.
Yes, yeah,
some people that live in Cortland still use a Peekskill address.
Mailing address, correct.
But at the same time, Peekskill did take ownership of the event when they made those signs. Wake Up America, Peekskill did.
Right.
Peekskill was a big player in that.
The actual site is I've been told, is where right now where the not where the Hollowbrook, where the Toll Brothers new things are, but I believe it's where the old Hollowbrook Drive-In Theater used to be. That's where I was.
Well,
told
there were two locations because there were two different concerts. One was in August and the other was in September.
Oh, I never.
The first one, Lakeland Acres, that's where the Hollowbrook Golf Course is right
yes,
now.
where that's right, exactly, the Hollowbrook Golf Course, right.
And then the second one was further down where the Drive-In Theater used to be.
Right, which are now actually called the Blue Jay Estates. It's a development
something
of
like
homes.
that. Yes. Anyway, that's an intriguing part of the history. I think I covered it fairly well. It turns out to be more political than racial. That Robeson did identify with those progressive or communistic elements at that time because he thought this would help his cause and his people and so on like that.
Right,
Unfortunately, times changed in the late 40s, with the Soviets getting the bomb and the espionage and all this type of thing.
Sure.
And so he sort of got caught in that
caught
net.
up in that whole thing,
And unfortunately, it wasn't really good for his own career.
Right.
He never really recovered after that.
Right. All right. So now let's go into the Revolutionary War, is the attack at Peekskill by the British in 1777.
Okay, well, speaking of that, there's another publication coincidentally titled with those very words.
Okay.
Because...
and the author happens to be John J. Curran.
Yeah. Okay, as the historian, I have an office in the Peekskill Museum, the old house on Union Avenue.
Yes.
One afternoon, I'm over there. I get a telephone call, and it's a man from West Point. And he said, I would like to see the Revolutionary War sites in Peekskill. This turns out to be Colonel Jim Johnson, the chief military historian at West Point. And of course I say yes. And this was a turning point for me to meet someone, of that
caliber of
knowledge and information and so on. And essentially, Colonel Johnson shows me these sites, and it just led to some of the documentation of this story that was a little bit more extensive than we knew before.
Well, because I think as more information came out, I think that people realized how important the Peekskill area was during the Revolutionary War.
Well, it turns out that Peekskill was the Continental Army headquarters for the Hudson Valley.
Right.
And as such, it was supplying the soldiers, the food, the ammunition, the transportation to all the other forts on the river in late 76 all through 77. And that's why it was a target of attack. And British came 3 times to knock out Peekskill. And they were successful. And what happened, I'm doing this, in a summarized sort of way,
of course.
is that the headquarters moved to West Point. Because West Point is on a ledge. And what really the history of West Point turns out to be that basically that's all that was left near the end of the war in 1780, and that's why the Benedict Arnold story is so important. But Peekskill is all part of that story as well.
Sure.
So it all sort of ties together. The Revolutionary War history in the Hudson Valley is something that's constantly interesting, and there's a tremendous amount of information that people can look into in their own ways and find something interesting.
Now, let's just one off the cuff though is. Did George Washington ever sleep in Peekskill, or is that just a misnomer?
Peekskill was his headquarters many times during the war. When he was
so Peekskillites or Peekskillians can say George Washington slept here.
Well, it was more than that. Washington used Peekskill as his headquarters because, again, Peekskill was the Continental Army center of operations or command post during the war. It was Washington as the commander-in-chief that set all this up in Peekskill in November 1776, right after the Battle of White Plains. So, but to follow up on your statement about Washington being centered in Peekskill, also when he travels to other directions, for example, when he goes to meet the French commander Rochambeau here in, let's say, Yorktown, where we are now, he stops over in Peekskill.
Right.
See, that's his...
Yeah, he uses it as the hub of operations.
Right, there you go. That's a good way of putting it.
Yes.
So that's pretty good, yeah. we could go in so many other different directions.
Well, I know, and there's if anyone is interested, I know you're one of the curators at the Peekskill Museum. The hours there are when they can come and see you, or by appointment. I know they can.
The museum is under an extensive renovation right now. Anybody that drives by can see and wonder what the heck is going on. Are they tearing the place down? Or are they fixing it up? A lot of people ask that and wonder that.
Well, anyone can call you. Your phone number is being viewed right now.
Yeah, the Peekskill Museum is in the telephone book, and I'm easy to find in that way.
Give your phone number. It's actually it's up on the screen.
Peekskill Museum, 914-736-0473.
When do you think the renovation should be completed?
Well, we started in 2006, and that's 6, 7, 8, and hopefully by the end of this year.
Oh.
All the extensive restorations, renovations, and changes will be done.
Sure, you have to go through architectural review and stuff.
Well,
like that.
We have an architect.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, we work with from Albany, and she comes down every once in a while, and we have these extensive discussions on what to do, how to do it, and who's going to do it, and who's going to pay for it.
Sure. It takes time.
Any historic
I'm sure there are grant monies that are being afforded
It's mostly thanks to Governor Pataki, when he was the governor, allowed us these grants that we're still working on. And right now we're working through the Parks Department. And so we're doing the best we can. There's a lot of paperwork and a lot of procedures. And so far it's successful.
It's how would you say? It's a process, and you just have to, it takes time. It's not as quick as you like it, but it eventually gets done.
When it's all done, the building and the facility will be there for the next 100 years. That's really what we're trying to do.
Sure. Okay, we have an easel behind us, and I see you brought this picture of downtown Peekskill, circa 1960. And so the question is now urban renewal. Let's move to the new phase where urban renewal, where old Peekskill's destruction in the 60s and the 70s. What exactly does this, or does it entail over here?
Well, the reason I brought this, and the reason I did the book about the old Peekskill's destruction, which looks like this, in the 1960s and 70s by these various influences, urban renewal, fires, riots, and the parking authority, is that as the Peekskill historian, I'm constantly asked, what happened to Peekskill?
Right.
Previous residents and other people in the outlying areas usually identified Peekskill as a center of industry and prosperity. And so to answer the question, that's why I did this research.
Right.
And I still don't have the answer. Because it's still such a complicated topic.
Well, it may not be just one answer. It could be a combination of many
factors. But it does seem
to
focus on that national, state, and local effort called urban renewal, which is truly a misnomer.
Right.
They didn't really renew very much. There were two phases to the operation. One is to remove older structures to rebuild on the same location, because Peekskill is of a limited size.
Correct.
It has only, 3 to 5 square miles?
Something
I forget
like that,
exactly what it is right now. But
Cortland wraps around from the north and eastern end, and even through the southern end. So so it's really landlocked in that sense.
So Peekskill is an enclosed area.
Right.
For them to remodel, to renew, to revive, to get something new there, the thought was they had to take out the old stuff to put the new stuff in.
Right.
Unfortunately, the destruction went pretty well, and that's what most of the pictures are. The modernization is still being talked about.
Right.
So constantly you hear the local politicians and people, well, we're going to revive, we're going to revitalize, we're going to recover, and there's a renaissance. But those words have been used for the last 30 years.
Right.
And so it's, on the positive side, you could say it's an ongoing process.
Right.
That the capacity is still there to do all these good things.
But there seems
how to do it, when to do it, and so on. That's part of the debate that you're still seeing in the newspaper.
And I think there seems to be this, even not just a local, but a national trend where you see a pullback where it's almost like they want to modernize, but they still want that character of back in from 50 years, 100 years with the brick and the Victorian homes.
That's a very good point. That's a really good point.
So there seems to be not so much modernization where they just go there, raise the buildings, and just put up something brand new in a contemporary mode.
That's right.
They really want. There seems to be a big calling for the revitalization or renovation of what's existing there,
right?
And then still fix up inside where, you know, I mean, looking back to the, you know, Europe, let's say France, Italy, and Spain, over there you can't even touch, if a building is anywhere over 30, 40 years old, God forbid you should touch outside. Inside is a different story. You can upgrade your kitchens, your living room, your bath, and everything else, but outside the structure has got to remain because there's a cultural society